everybody for attending PayFit's webinar on the upcoming changes for the 24-25 tax year and what you can do to prepare. We appreciate everybody who's joining today, and we hope that you find this very informative. During the webinar, a chat box will appear for you to ask any questions that you have, and if we have time at the end, we'll try and allocate about 10 minutes at the end for you to answer any questions. Any questions we don't get to, we'll follow up to you individually via email. But I will start with myself. My name is Iain Hunter-Moir, and I am the Implementation Manager at PayFit, where I oversee all the onboarding projects for our customers. I can see that some of our customers are on here at the moment that we've recently onboarded, which is good to see. I have 12 years experience working in payroll from the private and public sector, but I now specialise in implementations and data reconciliations. I will now hand over to Rebecca, who will give you a brief introduction to herself and her experience.
Thank you. Hi everyone, and welcome from me too. I'm Rebecca, and I'm happy to be here to share the latest legislation changes with you. For those of you who've seen my work before, you'll know I'm super passionate about payroll. I like to understand all of the complex legislation so I can explain it clearly to people with different levels of knowledge, from software developers to employees and even my mum. That's why, as a payroll expert at PayFit, I'm responsible for ensuring PayFit is always compliant and that my colleagues and our customers are kept up to date with the latest legislation. Today, I'll walk you through the legislative changes for the new tax year. You might already be aware of some of the bigger changes, but we'll also cover the usual updates. Okay. So we have 4 key changes coming up this year that might impact your payroll processes. I'll cover each one of them in more detail throughout the webinar. Afterwards, we'll discuss the usual changes that we see at the beginning of the tax year, including the NI rates announced just last week. And we'll also confirm which of the legislation won't change. Before we dive into the details, I'd like to take a quick poll to see which of those key changes you're most curious about. So, sorry, slides. So you should have a poll option in the bottom right. There's 4 options for each of the key changes. We have investment zones, paternity and carers leave, Scottish tax, and holiday pay and entitlement. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to submit your vote. I think we still have some more coming in. Okay, I think it's very clear that D is the winner here. So holiday pay and entitlement, and to be honest, that's the one that I'm most excited about. It's very complex, and we've been waiting a long time for all of these changes. We're all worried about holiday pay. It doesn't need to be too worrying. I think once you have a high-level overview of it, it's not going to be as complicated as they make it out to be. So I'm going to start with the statutory paternity leave. So on this first key change, the government has updated the rules around statutory paternity leave. They're offering more flexibility when it comes to their leave and pay. Remember that paternity leave applies not just to birth, but to adoption, surrogacy, and overseas adoptions. For paternity leave related to birth, it's applicable for a baby born on or after the 7th of April. But for adoption, surrogacy, and overseas adoption, it's applicable straight away from the first day of the tax year, the 6th of April. And that's because birth legislation is always applicable from the first statutory week on or after the first Sunday in April. So the first Sunday in April this year is the 7th of April. So that's where that day comes from. Something to be aware of is that the rules are slightly different if the baby is born before the 7th of April, but we'll send a link to some guidance in the chat. So there are 3 changes in relation to paternity leave. So previously, employees could only take their 2 weeks of paternity leave consecutively, and now they have the option to take it in two separate weekly blocks. Next, there's a change to the time frame for taking their paternity leave. So Before, they had to take their leave within 8 weeks of the relevant date. So that's the day the baby was born or placed with the parents. Now they have up to 52 weeks to take their leave. And finally, although they still need to notify their employer that they'll be taking paternity leave at the 15 weeks before the relevant date, so the date of birth or the matching date, they now have up until 4 weeks before the leave starts to confirm those dates. For each of these points, you'll likely need to adjust your absence policy to accommodate those changes, especially when they cover any statutory leaves. Next up, we have unpaid carers leave. So this would be used by employees who need time off to support a loved one with a disability, illness, or mental health condition. And this is what you need to be aware of. Employees are entitled to 1 week of unpaid carers leave within 12 months. It's important to remember because it's not an annual entitlement that automatically resets each calendar year or at the start of the tax year. It's on a rolling 12-month basis. The 1 week is sometimes referred to as 5 days, but it's actually based on the employee's working pattern. So 7-day workers will have 7 days to take. They can also choose to take the leave in half-day increments, which offers a lot more flexibility. In terms of the notice that they need to provide, the notice period is twice the length of the leave that they request, but there is a minimum of 3 days notice. So for example, if they request a half day, they need to give the minimum 3 days notice, but if they request 2 days, they need to provide 4 days notice. And as it's statutory leave, again, you'll likely need to include unpaid carers leave in your absence policies. And next we have investment zones. So ready for the new tax year, the government has established investment zones. They're similar to free ports, except that the investment zones are to boost growth in tech, green industries, and life sciences. These investment zones, along with the free ports, are known as a specialist tax site. Businesses within these sites might qualify for certain tax relief. For those of us in payroll, that tax relief is the employer national insurance contributions. You'll need to check your eligibility using HMRC's criteria before you can claim the relief. And then if you are eligible, you'll only pay employer national insurance on the employee's pay when they're earning over £25,000 a year. Whereas for normal employees, employers pay national insurance once the employee earns over £9,100 a year, so quite a big difference. To apply the relief, you simply need to transfer your employees to one of the 4 new NI categories. So we have N, E, K, or D. Then there is still some eligibility criteria for which employees you can claim the employer NI relief for, though. So it's not all employees. So you need to check HMRC's guidance on who might be eligible. The Department for Business and Trade website has some high-level information on the investment zones. But it's not great. We do hope to see some detailed guidance from HMRC at the beginning of the new tax year. They like to release them at the very last minute. Okay, this is the big one. So I'm going to try and, this is very complex and I could talk about it all day, but I don't want to spend too much time on it because although it's complex, it also might not be applicable to everybody. We will have another poll at the end to understand how many of you are interested to have a look into the details. If there's a few votes, we'll see what we can do to host a session dedicated to the holiday changes. The first thing I want to mention that we haven't included on the slide is that the new legislation for regular workers who often receive additional payments, we had a lot of case law to tell us which payment types to include when calculating the holiday pay. The new legislation confirms all of those payment types, so we don't need to remember all of the case laws. And for regular workers, this is where it starts to get exciting. The legislation changes how you calculate holiday pay and entitlement for your irregular or part-year workers. So that's workers like your zero-hour contracts or seasonal staff, part-time employees, they're classed as a regular employee, so it's just part-year workers. So it doesn't apply to full-time workers. It doesn't apply to those based in Northern Ireland. And it is applicable from your next holiday year, starting on or after the 1st of April 2024. So it's likely you don't need to apply these changes straight away. So if your holiday year runs from the 1st of January to the 31st of December, the changes won't be applicable until January 2025, so you have a little bit of time to get used to it. It is really important that the legislation is used at the right time and for the right workers, so you can't apply it to regular workers, you can't apply it to those in Northern Ireland, you can't apply it too early. So that's super important. Employers can choose to apply one of two methods. So their workers would either accrue a bank of leave, or they can be paid holiday pay in each pay period. As an employer, you might apply one method to some employees and the second method to other employees, but I'll explain both of those methods. To give you some context before we go through the next couple of slides, the legislation refers to 12.07%. This equates to 5.6 working weeks, which is what we know as the 28-day entitlement for 5-day workers. If you offer your employees any more than that, if you have any contractual holiday schemes, then you'll want to use a higher percentage. Additionally, something that wasn't very obvious is that with these legislation changes, if you already offer a holiday scheme that's more favourable to the worker, you can still use that. The legislation is here just to make the alternative options legal now. You will need to remember that you can't make these changes without consulting with the worker first, and then you'll need to vary their contract and update any absence policy. So it's not just going to apply automatically. Okay, so holiday entitlement is the first method. In this method, the employee accrues a bank of leave as an entitlement, so just like a regular worker. It's calculated as a percentage of the hours that they're working in the pay period, and in most cases this will be the 12.07% or higher if you offer them more annual leave. So that should be pretty straightforward. However, if they take sick or statutory parental leave, as they're not working any hours in that week, we need to work out their average hours over the last 52 weeks instead. You should see some guidance linked to in the chat. So now that the employee has that bank of annual leave to take, when they do take it, we need to pay it. The rate of pay is based on what we would refer to as the usual 52-week relevant period. So that's the calculation that we're using for regular workers. It's including their overtime, their commission payments, all of their regular payments. So that makes sure that when the irregular worker is taking their holiday, they're receiving their normal pay and not just their basic rate. You'll want to display this separately on the payslip to make it really clear that this is how it's being accrued, and we can go over this in more detail in the Q&A if you have any specific questions. I'll go through the next one. Okay, so this one is the one we've been waiting for. Rolled up holiday pay was deemed unlawful following a ruling by the European Court of Justice in 2006. But we weren't told what was actually lawful, so we were left in a bit of limbo. So with the new legislation, employers can lawfully use this calculation method now, but remember only from when your holiday starts. So it means that workers are paid holiday pay each time they're paid for the hours that they've worked. So if they're paid monthly, they'll receive their holiday pay monthly as well. They won't be paid when they do actually take their annual leave, but you need to make sure that they do still take it. It's calculated based on 12.07% of their total pay, but in the calculation, the rounding is really important. I would recommend looking at HMRC's calculations in that guidance that we linked to, and just be careful of the part where it tells you to round to the nearest penny, because it can make a big difference. Again, we can go into some calculation details. Probably, I think it might be easier in another session. So this one, you definitely want to display it clearly on the worker's payslip, and it's going to help if they forget that they don't get holiday pay when they actually go on holiday. So far so good, but it does get more complicated. Again, if the worker takes any statutory sick or parental leave, because they're not being paid their usual pay while they're on statutory leave, you need to calculate their rolled up holiday pay based on their average pay over the last 52 weeks. So quite similar to regular workers, but also a little bit different. I'd also like to mention that something that surprised me is that in this calculation, the actual legislation states to simply use an average of the holiday pay element over the last 52 weeks, which is probably quite simple, but HMRC's guidance is to use the worker's total pay over the last 52 weeks and then multiply that by 12.07%. I just wanted to mention, in case you look at both and get really, really confused like I did. I'd also say as well that if you have any employees that are coming to you asking about the calculation, they're not going to be looking at the legislation, they're going to be looking at the HMRC guidance. So when you're deciding which way you want to calculate it, I would probably recommend the HMRC guidance for now. So while we collect our thoughts on that, I'm going to pass you over to Iain, who can take you through some of the lighter-hearted changes, please.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Rebecca. There is just one question, Rebecca, just to someone's asked based on the holiday pay was from Adele. However, he's just asking whether they should still be using overtime or not based on the holiday pay.
Yes, so for now, for regular workers, it's been the case for a while that we would include regular overtime. For irregular workers, from your holiday year that starts on or after the 1st of April, yeah, you're going to include the regular overtime in there as well. I hope that answers the question.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rebecca. So, yes, hi guys. I'm on to the much smaller changes, not as complicated as Rebecca's holiday pay. So the first one we've got is the changes to national minimum wage. So the national minimum wages obviously would apply from April 2021 from anyone over the age of 25, and then it was lowered to 23, and now from April 2024 it's now been lowered down to 21. So anyone over the age of 21 now have to receive an hourly pay of £11.44. From last year, anyone over the age of 21 will get an estimated 9.8% increase to their hourly rate. Anyone that's now between the age of 18 and 20 from last year will get a roughly 14% increase on their hourly rate. And finally, anyone between the ages of 16 and 17 or an apprentice will have a 21% roughly estimated increase. So you can use those percentages for your budgets for the upcoming year as well, in terms of anyone moving up to the national minimum wage or national living wage. The Low Pay Commission attributes the size of these increases to the robust growth in the pay across the economy at the moment. However, the increases stop short of the voluntary real living wage set by the Living Wage Foundation, which is currently £12 across the UK and is £13.15 in London. In terms of implications for employers who don't pay staff at the appropriate rate not only risk claims from workers, but will be named and shamed on the government report, which I believe everyone will be aware of. It's important for employers to keep abreast of any increases in pay rates, and particularly around the application of the national living wage to younger workers now aged 21 from this new tax year. Please also note that the national minimum wage increase also applies to the alabaster calculations or your statutory maternity pay. You may want to double check with your current payroll provider whether these will be automatically increased or if manual intervention is needed. Anyone that's using PayFit, an action will appear for you to review this. In terms of the national minimum wage and PayFit also, anyone who's fallen under it, you will get a required action to review that person's salary as well. Moving on to tax thresholds in Scotland. Unfortunately, this is where I live, and tax is getting very complicated in Scotland, and I'm deciding whether moving to England or Wales would be much better. So in Scotland, we've now introduced another tax bracket of 45 pence. So as part of the Scottish budget, the government have announced that the starter and basic rate income tax bands will be increased by inflation to 14,876 and 26,561 respectively. Please note that these values are excluding the tax fee allowance of the 12,570. The higher rate threshold and top rate threshold will remain the same, unchanged, but a new advance rate will be introduced at a rate of 45 pence, applying to income over 75,000, again, excluding the tax fee allowance of the 12,570. An additional 1 pence will be added to the top rate, increasing it from 47p to 48p on income over 125, 140. These changes are also to take effect from the 6th of April 2024. And as you know, Scotland now has 6 tax bands to England's 3 and Wales. I would advise also double checking with your current provider if you're not using PayFit, just to ensure that they've got these tax bands updated. And within PayFit, these will be automatically applied when you go into April's payroll as well. And again, just another slide is just showing you the rates for everyone living in Scotland. In terms of people living in Scotland, or if you've got any new starters in your company from Scotland, it would advise you that you place them on the standard tax code without the S, and let HMRC decide whether they are in Scotland, as it will be based on their address that HMRC hold for them. Moving on to national insurance. As you're aware, there's been a couple of changes in national insurance in this tax year. So as you're aware, from January, the government made a change to change the NI from 12 down to 10%. And now recently have been announced that that's now going from 10% down to 8%. So in terms of the changes and the savings for this, anyone who earns over £25,000 a year will save around £249. And anyone earning over 35,000 will have a £449 saving estimate, and anybody above that and the higher or additional tax rates will estimately save £754 in national insurance. Just a note, and may not apply to every payroll, but the reduced rate for married women has also reduced, but there's only a handful of these women still in employment. So if you don't have anyone on an NIB, please don't worry about this update. In terms of student loans, so the Department of Education has confirmed that the student loans thresholds for Plan 1 and 2 will change. So from Plan 1, the loan will rise to 24,990, meaning that employees on this plan will be saving an estimated £22, so they should have an estimated £22 extra in their salary. Plan 2 has been frozen, so yeah, no changes from Plan 2 unfortunately, and also the same with Plan 3, which is your postgraduate and doctorate loan, has also been frozen. In terms of Scotland, so Plan 4 refers to anyone who's studied in Scotland. This is increasing to 31,395, which will estimately save employees £28 roughly a month that they'll have in their pay packet from April onwards. As you're aware, there will be a Plan 5 being introduced, but this isn't until April 2026, and the threshold at this will be looking at 25,000 and above at the moment. Now moving on to our statutory pay rates. As you're aware, all statutory payments will continue to be calculated at 90% of the employee's average weekly earnings for the first 6 weeks. Therefore, the workers can anticipate a statutory weekly rate of either 90% of the average weekly earnings of the new value of £184.03, or whichever is lower, an increase from the £172.48 last year. In terms of the maternity schedules, you should remember that to start changing the new rate from the first Sunday in April. As Rebecca mentioned, this is from the 7th. So for example, if you have an employee who started maternity on a Wednesday, their statutory week runs from a Wednesday to Tuesday. Therefore, their new rate is payable from the 10th of April, just to use that one as an example. Moving on to statutory sick pay, the rate has now increased to £116.75 a week from £109.40. Again, anyone using PayFit, these rates will be applied automatically. And what's staying the same, continuing on, so we now have all the tax thresholds in Wales and the rest of the UK, so all the thresholds are remaining the same, so no changes to the thresholds or any changes to the tax allowance. So the tax allowance is now frozen. That will be your 12,570. I believe it's to 2028, we believe now. It could change, as you know what the government is like with changing things. So at the moment, I do believe it's 2020 when the tax codes may change. HMRC issue a P9X, which is information on tax codes, but it may not be worthwhile due to nothing changing on the tax codes, but it's a document worth reading if you want to. The other ones is the national insurance thresholds. Again, these haven't changed, but luckily now, with the change in January to March, also affected the calculation of national insurance for directors. Now within PayFit, you can review your director's national insurance in March, so you can see what changes been made with the recalculation, and to basically give the director a heads up in terms of what to expect. So if you do have any directors on your payroll using PayFit, please, you can review these once just now to give your director a heads up as well. What isn't changing still? So we've got no changes to Class 1A and Class 1B national insurance rates and thresholds, no changes to company car benefit rates, employment allowance and apprenticeship levy allowance, court orders, and also the qualifying earnings for automatic enrolment. I do believe the government are reviewing the automatic enrolments just now, so changes may come in the future based on the criteria of people joining your company's pension scheme.
Okay.
I'll move on to Rebecca.
So now that you know what isn't changing, we're going to go over some things that might be helpful for you to think about so you can be prepared for the new tax year. Sorry, Ian, that's back over to you.
No, that's fine, Rebecca. Thank you. So yes, to finalise for the end of the tax year, so just to ensure that you apply all tax code notifications from HMRC, which is your P6s or your P6Bs, either from your online notification or if you receive them by post as well. And your final FPS is due to be submitted by at least the 5th of April. And you should also remember to tick the final submission box when it comes to your EPS to let HMRC know that this is your final submission for the tax year. In terms of week 53, we currently don't have we don't currently run a weekly payroll on PayFit, but if you're a customer that not using PayFit who's on this webinar, this will affect you if you pay any employees on a Thursday or a Friday, that there will be a week 53 for this tax year. It would be best to reach out to your current provider to just ensure that your system is set up to ensure that they can run payroll on week 53 and to ensure that the tax and NI calculations are done correctly. Your final EPS for March is to be submitted by the 19th of April. And your final bill will be due to be paid on the 22nd of May for April. No, that should be the 22nd of April for the final liability.
Yes, you're right.
Yes, sorry, there's just a typo on that. Do apologise. So yes, the 22nd of April is the final month for March's payroll. And then your P6s are obviously due by the 31st of May. But if you're using PayFit, your P6s will be available to your employees after you run March's payroll, and they will be available in the employee space where they view their payslips. I'll now pass on to Rebecca.
Yep. So your preparations for the new tax year, are mostly around the new legislation that we have. Some of them you might want to look into sooner rather than later, so you're not in a rush when you do need to apply it. If you have any absence policies or intranet pages, employee handbooks, or anything that mentions employee statutory leave rights, you're going to need to update those to include the changes to statutory paternity leave and the new unpaid carers leave. And don't forget, if you have any occupational schemes for paternity leave or you want to introduce one for unpaid carers leave, you need to change that in your policy as well. Next, you'll hopefully already know, but if not, you should identify if any of your workers are classed as an irregular hours or part-year worker. You'll need to start thinking about how you might need to apply the legislation and then get in touch with the employees to discuss their employment contracts before you change anything. Investment zones, this is a nice, easy one to apply. So you'll need to check if you're eligible for the tax relief, and maybe somebody in your company's already checked for you. If you're eligible, you can simply transfer the relevant employees to those new NI categories, so you'll pay the lower amount of employer national insurance. Next, national minimum wage. You can start to identify any workers now who might be under the national minimum wage rate, and then look at increasing their pay. And don't forget, you'll need to communicate with those employees in advance, especially before they start to come to you. And as with the last few years, you should check to see if you're eligible for employment allowance or small employers relief, if you are, you need to indicate this in your payroll software so it can be calculated automatically. Employment allowance specifically is an annual claim process. It doesn't automatically carry into the next tax year. Back to you, Iain.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Rebecca. In terms of starting for the new tax year, from the 1st of April, the national minimum wage and national living wage rates will take effect, and also the new holiday pay and entitlement regulations for your next leave year. As Rebecca says, if your leave starts from the 1st of April, the changes again won't take effect until the following year. All new tax codes from HMRC, so you should now be receiving P9s from HMRC. It normally starts around the 20th of February and goes right through to March. So you should start to receive them just now, and they'll be applied in April's payroll. P9 should be coming through, and no one should be on a week, month one tax code. So everyone should be on a cumulative tax code for the month of April, as it's due to the new tax year. The new national insurance rates will take effect from the 6th of April, alongside the new Scottish tax threshold, new student loan thresholds, and then from the 7th of April, the new statutory paternal pay rates as well will take effect. Back to you, Rebecca.
Okay. We haven't really mentioned benefits in kind so far this webinar, but it does form part of your year-end process. So I just wanted to give you a reminder of the important dates if you do provide any company benefits. So firstly, if you payroll your benefits, you'll need to make sure that the benefits have been taxed accordingly in the correct tax year, so before the 5th of April. And don't forget that payrolling benefits will become mandatory from April 2026. So if you're not already payrolling benefits and you want to start next year, you need to register with HMRC by 10 p.m. on the 5th of April. And that's also the last day to register for a PAYE settlement agreement for the 2023-2024 tax year. If you payroll all of your benefits, you will only need to submit the P11DB, and you need to submit that to HMRC by the 6th of July. If you don't payroll all of your benefits, so if they're all going on a P11D or some are going on a P11D and some are payrolled, you'll need to issue P11Ds to the relevant employees that have benefits, and then submit your P11Ds and your P11DB to HMRC by the 6th of July. And then finally, the payments. So your Class 1A liability from your P11DB needs to be paid to HMRC by the 22nd of July. And if you submit a PSA, a PAYE settlement agreement, for any Class 1B or tax due on that, you need to pay this by the 22nd of October. So now that we've covered those changes, so we asked at the beginning which are the changes you're most curious about, but now that you've heard a little bit more about the key changes, I'd like to know if there's any that you'd like to know more about, and then we're going to either be able to cover some of that in the Q&A section, or we'll create a further session for it. So from the polls option in the bottom right, from there, if you can tell us which of them you'd like to know more about. You can see Irene's given us another option. Does anybody else want to add in their comments?
Yeah, we've got a few questions as well, Rebecca, so we can cover them after.
Okay.
As well.
You're not very good at keeping track of the chat.
Okay. I think whilst people are voting, Thomas, you've sent a question around from P6 and P6B submissions. Your final P6 is it should be applied at the end of March. Only the P9s will be received or to be actioned in April. You should start to receive P6s after you're on April's payroll. You should not receive any, from April. HMRC can send through a new tax code in April, which would be a P6 as well. So you just have to be careful of what the notification is. Question from Adele: when does the new tax year pay reference period start for weekly paid workers week commencing the 8th of April?
Do you want me to take that one?
I believe it should be from week 1, but yeah, Rebecca, if you want to.
So it's the first pay reference period that falls after the 1st of April. So it depends on when you're paying your employees for. So if you're paying your employees on, say, the 1st to the 7th, then you'll apply the new rates immediately. But if you're paying your employees from, say, the 2nd to the 8th, you won't apply those new rates until from the 9th onwards. I hope that explains it.
Yes, he's come back and that's fine. We've had a couple more questions, Rebecca, but do you just want to finish off with the polls and then we can answer the rest of the questions at the end of the...
Yeah, I can't see if anybody has... Is that just me?
We have... Yes, we do. The majority have voted for holiday pay.
Okay, interesting. That's good. That's good. I'd like to go through another session on that. I think there's a lot to know about it. I think it's a little bit more complex when you get into the part where the employee has statutory leave or sick leave. But other than that, if you imagine not all of your employees are going to have that every month, so that part should make it a lot easier than what we had before.
Yeah.
I'll let Iain continue.
No, that's fine. Thanks very much, Beck. In terms of tips to try and give you guys to take away, is to get started early. There's a lot of big changes, especially around employees' contracts and maybe any appendix that you send on alongside people's contracts, and obviously holiday entitlement and things like that. So it'd be best to review this with your HR department as soon as possible. Obviously, if any of your employees are affected by new legislation, please communicate with them. I think it's just good practice to let your employees know what changes are taking effect, as your employees may not be keeping up to date as much as we are in terms of legislation changes. So yes, good practice to let your employees know what's changing. Another tip is to obviously make a list and stay organised. Communicate with other members of your business as well. I think obviously stakeholders would be really interested in learning about the increases to national minimum wage in terms of budgets, again, the holiday pay calculations. So it would be good to ensure that everyone else knows within the business. And in terms of anyone who doesn't have an integration with HR and payroll, it's something to maybe have a think about, as it would ensure that your payroll's running smoothly in terms of any changes, instead of trying to make one change in HR to go and make a change in your payroll system as well. In terms of how PayFit helps, so we do have a dedicated CCR team who are all payroll specialists, and they will be able to support you through any payroll query that you have. We also integrate with, again, HMRC, so we send your HMRC submissions on your behalf. Easy employee access to P60s. As I said, once you're on your matches payroll, your employees' P60s are available straight away. In normal circumstances, other payrolls normally wait until May to submit your P60s, but yeah, within PayFit you get access to them straight away. As I said earlier, we also give you alerts when it comes to national minimum wage, and that also includes if you have a salary sacrifice scheme. So anybody who's on a pension scheme of salary sacrifice, we also mark down whether they're under national minimum wage as well. So it's a nice feature that PayFit has in terms of ensuring that you're paying your employees correctly. In terms of our breakdown, we give a detailed breakdown of how tax is calculated, how national insurance is calculated, and pension for the user of PayFit. And it's an easy way of, if you get a query from your employees, you can just take a screenshot of this and send it on to them, rather than trying to type out an explanation in an email, as it can become quite long-winded and a lot of back and forth in that way. We have a lot of help centre articles which simplifies legislation. So as people who use PayFit just now, we do have a lot of articles that helps answer your queries, and we try and simplify everything that HMRC throws at us to try and ensure that you can read it easily. Complex calculation breakdowns for admins. So we can obviously, as I said before, we show you a breakdown of all the calculations. Again, anything that you're not too sure of, on one of our payroll specialists can help with that as well, and to try and help you understand what the system's doing in that sense. And then stress-free compliance. So within PayFit does all the legislation updates in the background, so you don't have to worry about the tax threshold changes, national insurance changes and all that. That's all done for you as well. So moving on to PayFit would be a stress-free world for everyone, if I do say so myself. In terms of resources to help you prepare, we'll be able to provide you with an end of tax year compliance checklist, and also an article with 8 key changes for the new tax year for payroll year end and processing in PayFit. So they will be issued to everyone who joined within the webinar today as well. And that is our webinar finished. So we would like to thank everybody for coming along. Annie has now shared all the checklists within the chat, so please use these and take these away with you. But we'll kind of go through the questions that we've got. So Irene and Ashley have come back and mentioned about the mandatory payroll benefits from 2026. So yes, that is correct. From April 2026, all employers will have to payroll benefits. So it's something maybe worthwhile looking into now. Now, if you can still register to payroll benefits for the next tax year, but you only have until the 5th or the 6th of April, 5th of April to get it sorted. If not, you would have to do it in the following tax year. So it's just something to think about. And it would be best to maybe get it done just now, so you're not having to rush at the last minute when the time comes to payroll benefits.
Can I add something on that? We are expecting more guidance around it, because there are still some benefits that you can't payroll. Accommodation, beneficial loans, they're calculated at the end of the tax year and normally go on a P11D. If you apply them as a payroll benefit in March, the employee is going to have to pay a lot of tax, and we have the 50% regulatory limit. That means they might not be able to pay all of the tax, and then the remainder goes on the P11D anyway. So there's still a lot more guidance to come on how they can action that, but I guess they're doing as much as they can to force the employers to payroll their benefits. I think from an employee perspective as well, it's better for budgeting to be able to pay their tax throughout the tax year, instead of receiving a P11D at the end of the year and then getting a new tax code. And if they're moving to another job, they think, well, why am I still paying for benefits from my old company? So I do think payrolling benefits is the future, but there's still a lot more to be done to make it simpler.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Apologies if I am pronouncing this name wrong. So we've got a question from Cicely, I believe the name is, asking around how do we ensure that HMRC submissions are correct year to date. Cicely, I would advise you, if you're using PayFit, to raise a ticket with your current CCR, and they would be able to help you with that question. Unfortunately, we can't answer that type of question here on our webinar. The next one is from Anna. Regarding P11D, how do I submit employee contributions before I run the March payroll or April payroll? Again, Anna, I would ask you to raise a ticket with your CCR, who would be able to provide all the guidance in terms of how to input and your benefits for the current tax year and the tax year going forward as well.
We did have some pre-submitted questions as well. Should I take one of those?
Yes, you can.
Yeah. So somebody has asked us, sorry, I didn't get the name. We pay for lunches and dinner for our employees. I want to cover any taxes by the company, not the employee. How do I go about it in terms of P11D reporting? So the answer is that unless it's food that's provided in the workplace and it's reasonably available for all of your employees, for example, a canteen, then there's no liability then. Otherwise, it is a taxable benefit. It either needs to be recorded on the P11D, which means that the employee then pays tax on the benefit, which I think is what you don't want to do. Otherwise, you can add it to a PAYE settlement agreement. But sorry, on the PAYE settlement agreement, that's where the employer covers the tax and also pays Class 1B national insurance on behalf of the employee, so the employee doesn't really even notice that they're receiving that benefit. If you do want to do this, to report on the PSA, if you don't already have one in place, you'd have needed to apply before the 6th of April 2023 to be able to report them. So for now, they need to be reported on the P11D, which means that the employee will be liable, but maybe you already have a PSA in place. We had another one as well, which was we have beneficial loans and loan write-offs to report for this tax year. Do only loans of 10,000 and over need to be reported through payroll and on P11Ds. So the loan is only beneficial if it amounts to over £10,000 over the tax year. You have to remember that if you have 2 loans of £6,000, that goes over the £10,000 limit. So at that point, it needs to be reported on the P11D or I don't think it can't be payrolled because it's calculated at the end of the tax year. So if you have an employee who's had a loan of at least £10,000, it's classed as a beneficial loan. They're getting a benefit from it, so it needs to be reported as a benefit to HMRC.
Perfect, Rebecca. We do have some more questions. Apologies for the name pronunciation. So I think one for me, when will P11Ds be generated? If you're referring to PayFit, we don't have a dedicated deadline on P11Ds, but I would advise you to raise the question with your CCR and they could maybe give you an estimated time if you're using PayFit. In terms of always other companies with P11Ds, they should be issued to employees by the 6th of July. A question from Ryan Kendall. If we claim the employment tax relief, do we get the insurance relief under 25k?
So I assume that's investment zones. Sorry, can you ask that question again? Because I was thinking, where are we going with the question?
Oh, it's okay. So yeah, all Ryan's asked for is if we claim the employment tax relief, do we get the insurance relief under 25k?
So the relief that you get through the payroll is the employer national insurance. So if the employee is earning over 25,000, you'll start to pay employers NI on the earnings over 25,000. So if they're earning 30,000, then you'll only pay the employer national insurance on £5,000. I hope that explains it.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. Question from Thomas is, do those who use PayFit need to do anything in order for P60s to be generated? No, you do not. You just have to run your March payroll and the P60s should be readily available in employee spaces. The final year to dates are submitted to HMRC with March's payroll, so HMRC will also have that information as well for all your employees. Ryan, excellent info, that's fine. Emma Sumner, is a season ticket loan less than 10k needing to, I'm assuming, be reported?
Something I was going to mention actually about beneficial loans is if you, there is a really great resource called the CWG5. It's HMRC guidance, so Charlie Whiskey Golf 5. And in that, it has a long list of all of the different types of benefits. Obviously, there's still some benefits that are unusual, but it tells you on there whether it should be reported on the P11D, which would mean that it's taxable, or if it needs to be, if you need to pay Class 1A national insurance on it as an employer or not. So I'd recommend having a look at the CWG5 because I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Another question from Thomas is, how does HMRC know if a colleague works in Scotland? Which attribute in PayFit communicates this? Is it the home address? So yes, so once you submit the RTI, so the employment information, so again, if you have a new starter, you would just place them on the standard tax code of 1257L, or if that's A or B, or if it's C, it would be BR or 0T. You would not put the S in front of that tax code. So if you know that person, if the address refers to Scotland, you still do not add the S. HMRC, once you submit your first HMRC information to HMRC, they will then send an adjusted tax code with the S on it. Employers should be making the decision on employees' tax in terms of living in Scotland or in Wales, even though Wales is the same as England in terms of tax thresholds. If you did have someone in Wales also, you would still put them on 1257L as an example, and HMRC would send through the C for them living in Wales. Another question from Thomas. PayFit auto-generates a tax code unless it's on the P45. We never touch the tax code. Yes, that's correct, because whatever statement the employee's chosen on their starter checklist, HMRC adds them on to the standard tax code of the 1257L. So yes, we only apply the standard tax code. HMRC will apply the S or the C once you submit it to HMRC. Hope that's okay, Thomas.
Any last questions? Have we run over, Iain?
No, I think we've got till 4.
Okay.
So does anybody else have any questions they would like to ask? We still have...
Or if you've missed it.
Just going through, I don't think we've missed any of anyone's questions. Again, anyone who's obviously using PayFit and does have any additional questions, please, you can just raise a ticket with your CCR. And they would be able to assist with anything we've gone over here and pass anything over to myself or Rebecca to look into for you as well. Oh, we've got a question from Ashley. Do we need to register for a PSA if we usually complete one?
No, you should be able to use this. Once you have that agreement in place with HMRC, they'll assume that you're going to continue using that until you make a change. So, yeah, that's fine.
Is it maybe one to know if someone who used to have benefits and doesn't have benefits, they still need to submit a null P11D, is that right?
You're right with the P11DB. If they've submitted benefits in the past and no longer have any, and they think that they don't need to submit to P11DB, HMRC are expecting a nil submission. Otherwise, they're just going to estimate how much benefits you've had during the tax year, which is obviously for you is 0. PSA, I'm not sure. I'm sure you're supposed to let them know when something changes. So I would assume that you also let them know when you no longer need the PSA. I think with a PSA, normally once you've started, you kind of continue going on for a while. So I'm not sure how many people would just stop using a PSA.
Perfect. Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, does anybody have any more questions before we wrap up? Oh, someone's typing just now. Yeah. Oh, thank you very much, Kristen.
We have a lot of people typing. I know, Thomas. That's why I kept muting myself every single call. You can hear the clocks. I have 14 clocks altogether. I'm not obsessed. I just I like clocks. Ideally, yes. We do want to do more sessions. This was kind of what you need to do to get ready for the end of tax year. But the bigger changes, I think we need a lot more time. I'm more than happy to go through it. So maybe in the near future, we'll be letting you know that there's especially one on holiday pay and entitlement.
Yeah, I definitely think it would be recommended. Definitely.
I've heard that joke before, Emma. I think a lot of people say you'll never be late. Okay. Shall we end it there?
Yes, guys, we will wrap up there. If anyone hasn't taken the guides, please obviously just drop a message to your CSR and you can get those guides sent on if no one's collected them from the chat. But no, thank you everyone for attending our Power Hour webinar. It's very much appreciated for you guys to take the time. And we hope that everything's been very informative and that you have learned all the new changes and kind of what to do kind of going forward.
Amazing. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.